The question hung in the air, sharp and cold as the ice in my father's glass. "Can you even afford to eat here?" my sister mocked, her voice a carefully polished weapon. Then, as if on cue, the waiter walked over, a warm, genuine smile gracing his face. He didn't look at Heather, or my parents, or the smug fiancé beside her. He looked directly at me. "Welcome back, Miss Dara," he said, his voice a low, respectful hum that cut through the tension. "Would you like your usual table?" My dad, in the middle of a sip of overpriced Cabernet, nearly spit out his wine. The silence that followed was more stunning than any shouted word could ever be. It all started 5 years ago, when I walked away from everything my family expected me to be, when I chose the heat of a kitchen over the cold certainty of a boardroom. They always judged my choices, dismissed my culinary dreams as something beneath our family name. Little did they know, tonight, as they gathered at Maison, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, to celebrate my sister Heather's engagement, they were about to come face to face with just how much had changed. My stomach knots as I straightened my simple black dress. Sometimes, the hardest reservations to make are with your own past. To understand that moment, you have to understand where I came from. Growing up in Greenwich, Connecticut, being a Mitchell meant something very specific. We weren't just wealthy, we were a legacy. Our name was etched onto plaques at the local country club, on donor walls at the library, and in the alumni directories of the most prestigious universities. My parents, Richard and Margaret Mitchell, built their entire identities around these status markers: the right address, the right schools, the right professions. Our sprawling colonial home, with its manicured lawns and perfectly impersonal decor, wasn't a home so much as a stage. It hosted fundraisers where my mother would parade us children around, like carefully chosen accessories, her pride directly proportional to how well we fit into her vision of success. "The Mitchell children are destined for greatness," she'd tell her friends at garden parties, the words gliding smoothly over the clinking of iced tea glasses. My father would nod approvingly from behind his whiskey tumbler. A silent, powerful endorsement. "Heather is already set on Yale Law, and Ethan shows such promise in mathematics. He'll make an excellent investment banker." When the guests inevitably turned to me, the quiet middle child, my mother's smile would tighten just a fraction of an inch. "Dara has creative inclinations," she'd say, the pause before the word creative filled with a universe of unspoken disappointment. "She'll find her way." What she meant was that I was the family anomaly, the variable in their perfectly calculated equation of success. While Heather excelled at debate club and Ethan won state-level math competitions, I spent my hours in our housekeeper Elena's domain, the kitchen. The kitchen was the one room in our house that felt truly alive. It smelled of yeast and garlic, of simmering sauces and fresh herbs, a stark contrast to the faint, sterile scent of lemon polish that permeated the rest of the house. Elena, a warm-hearted woman from Greece with flour always dusting her apron, recognized something in me that my parents couldn't, or wouldn't, see. It wasn't a hobby. It was a genuine passion. "You have the hands for this work." "Agape moo," she'd say, her voice as rich as the olive oil she drizzled over everything. She taught me how to knead bread dough until it was smooth and elastic, how to precisely dice vegetables with a speed that seemed magical, how to trust my senses, "The way you taste, the way you smell," she'd murmur, watching me close my eyes to identify the spices in a stew. "You understand food in your soul." While my mother's friends discussed art auctions and European travel, Elena and I discussed the merits of different types of basil and the perfect temperature for searing a scallop. While my father taught Ethan about stock portfolios, Elena taught me how to make a stock from roasted bones that could form the foundation of 100 different dishes. My parents' world was abstract, built on numbers and influence. My world was tangible, built on texture, flavor, and the alchemy of turning simple ingredients into something extraordinary. By 13, I was creating my own recipes, scribbling them in a worn notebook I kept hidden under my bed. By 16, I was hosting secret dinner parties for my friends whenever my parents traveled. They were elaborate, 5-course affairs that I planned for weeks, spending all my allowance money on high-quality ingredients from specialty shops. My friends would sit around our formal dining table, a room usually reserved for my parents' stiff, joyless gatherings, and their faces would light up with delight as I brought out each dish. In those moments, serving food I had poured my heart into, I felt more powerful and more myself than I ever did trying to live up to the Mitchell name. The kitchen became my sanctuary, the one place where I wasn't a disappointment, where my creative inclinations were a source of pride, not concern. The inevitable collision between my world and my family's came during my junior year of high school. It was time to discuss college applications, a ritual in our house as serious as a corporate merger. We were all seated in my father's study, a room paneled in dark wood and smelling of old leather and his expensive cigars. Books I suspected he'd never read lined the shelves, their spines perfect and unbroken. "We've scheduled your tours for Wharton, Harvard, and Dartmouth," my father announced, not asking, but informing. "Your grades are good enough, though you'll need to focus on your extracurriculars to stand out." "I've been thinking," I began, my voice trembling slightly. I had practiced this speech 100 times in my head. "I don't think a business degree is right for me. I've been researching culinary schools. The Culinary Institute of America is one of the best in the world." And I never got to finish. My father set his glass down with a heavy thud that echoed in the silent room. He looked at me, not with anger, but with a kind of profound, weary disappointment that was far worse. "Cooking," he said, the word tasting like something foul in his mouth. "That's a servant's work. Dara." The words struck me like a physical blow. I looked at my mother for support, but her face was a mask of cold agreement. "Your father is right," she said. "It's a fine hobby, dear, but it's not a career. Not for a Mitchell. Mitchell's hire chefs," my father declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. "They don't become them." The conversation was over. The subject was closed. To appease them, to keep the fragile peace in our home, I did what was expected. I applied to business schools. I wrote essays about leadership and global markets, words that felt foreign and hollow on my tongue. I was accepted to Dartmouth, my father's and grandfather's alma mater, and the relief in our house was palpable. I was back on track, the anomaly corrected. But you can't extinguish a fire by pretending it's not there. At Dartmouth, I found ways to nurture my true passion in secret. I took food science and nutrition courses, electives I could justify to my parents as being complementary to business administration. I got a part-time job washing dishes at a local high-end restaurant, just to be near the energy of a professional kitchen, lying to my family that I was working at the campus library. The long hours over a steamy sink, my hands raw and chapped, felt more honest and fulfilling than any lecture on microeconomics. My double life reached its peak when I started an underground supper club. In my tiny off-campus apartment, I'd spend my weeks studying for exams I didn't care about and my weekends planning and executing intricate menus for fellow students. I charged them just enough to cover the cost of ingredients and to fund my secret weekend workshops with local chefs in Vermont and New York. I was living 2 lives, and the exhaustion was beginning to wear on me. The Dara who sat in corporate finance classes was a ghost, a hollow shell of the person who came alive in front of a stove. The strain of maintaining the facade was immense, a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety beneath the surface of my life. I was a Mitchell, playing the part they had written for me, but every perfectly plated dish I served in secret was a rebellion. A quiet insistence that my own story was waiting to be told. My double life continued, a precarious balancing act, all the way into graduate school. I was 6 months into an MBA program at Columbia, a 2-year sentence in a world of spreadsheets and synergy that was making me profoundly unhappy. I felt like an imposter, sitting in lectures about market capitalization, while my mind was consumed with the Maillard reaction and the proper way to laminate dough for croissants. My heart wasn't in it, and my grades, for the first time in my life, began to reflect my apathy. I was going through the motions, fulfilling a contract I had reluctantly signed with my family, and every day felt like a betrayal of myself. Then, the universe sent a sign, not as a whisper, but as a thunderclap. Chef Laurent Dubois, a culinary deity with 3 Michelin stars and a reputation for fierce perfectionism, was visiting the campus for a lecture series at the business school. The topic was the business of haute cuisine, a title my parents would have approved of. I, of course, wasn't there as a student. I was working. I had convinced the university's catering director to let me help with the faculty reception, following the lecture, offering to work for free just for the chance to be in the same room as my idol, while my classmates networked with the great chef, shaking his hand and asking him about brand expansion. I was in the back, plating hundreds of canapes. One of the items I had insisted on preparing myself was a seared duck breast, on a brioche toast point with a cherry and red wine reduction. It was a simple bite, but the reduction was my secret pride. It took 8 hours to make correctly. A slow, patient process of simmering and straining until it was a perfect, glossy syrup that balanced sweetness, acidity, and depth. As the reception wound down, I saw Chef Dubois pick one up from a passing tray. He stopped mid-conversation, his eyes closing for a moment as he tasted it. He didn't swallow. He held it on his palate, his expression unreadable. Then his eyes snapped open, and he scanned the room, not for a fellow academic or a business leader, but for a server. His gaze landed on me as I was clearing a tray of empty glasses. He walked directly toward me, a force of nature in his crisp chef's whites. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was sure I had done something wrong. "You," he said, his French accent thick but his voice precise. He pointed at the half-eaten canape in his hand. "Who made this?" "I did, chef," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. He looked me up and down, taking in my simple black server's uniform, my hands that were calloused from my secret kitchen jobs. "The duck is cooked perfectly. The brioche is acceptable. But this reduction," he paused, holding my gaze. "Who taught you to make a reduction like this?" I taught myself, chef," I admitted, my cheeks flushing. "From books, videos, just experimenting." He stared at me for a long moment, a flicker of something disbelief, then recognition in his intense blue eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. He didn't hand it to my classmates who were clamoring for his attention. He handed it to me. "You are wasting your talent here," he said, his voice low and serious. "Meant only for me. This business school, it will teach you how to count money. It will not teach you how to create. Come to my kitchen in New York. I will give you a trial. If you survive, I will make you great." He turned and walked away before I could even respond, leaving me standing there with the weight of his words and the crisp rectangle of his card in my hand. The card felt heavier than any textbook I'd ever owned. It was a key, an escape route, a dare. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of my sterile student apartment, the topoths of my life stretching out before me with terrifying clarity. One was the path my family had paved for me, smooth, well-lit, and leading to a destination I had no desire to reach. The other was a dark, unknown trail into the woods, fraught with risk and uncertainty, but it was the only path that felt like my own. By sunrise, I knew what I had to do. 2 weeks later, I stood in my parents' immaculate living room. The room was decorated in shades of beige and cream, a space so devoid of personal touches it could have been a luxury hotel lobby. The air was sterile, controlled, just like the future they had planned for me. My parents were on one sofa, my father reading the Wall Street Journal, my mother leafing through a catalog for a charity auction. Heather, home from her first year at Yale Law, was on the other, scrolling through her phone. The scene was a perfect portrait of the Mitchell family life, together, but separate. "I have something to tell you all," I said. The sound of my own voice seemed to break the placid surface of the room, for pairs of eyes looked up, their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to Heather's impatient annoyance. I took a deep breath. I'm dropping out of the MBA program. The silence that followed my announcement was a physical thing. It was heavy and cold, pressing in on me from all sides. My father slowly, deliberately, folded his newspaper and placed it on the coffee table. He removed his reading glasses and looked at me, his face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. "I beg your pardon," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm leaving Columbia," I repeated, my voice stronger this time. "I've been given an opportunity to work in Chef Laurent Dubois' kitchen. I'm going to enroll in culinary school at night. This is absolutely unacceptable," my father said, his voice still low, but now laced with a thread of steel. "We have invested everything in your education, everything except respect for what I actually want," I countered, the words bolder than I felt. A spark of rebellion I didn't know I possessed had finally ignited. My mother's face, which had been a study in shocked disbelief, hardened into a mask of cold disapproval. "Dara, this is not a discussion. It's a foolish, childish fantasy. You will complete your degree." "No," I said simply. "I won't." Heather let out a short, cold laugh. "Always the rebel, aren't you, Dara? Always have to be different." She looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. "Let's see how long you last. Cooking for minimum wage. The real world is a lot harder than your little dinner parties." Ethan, who had come home for the weekend from his junior analyst position at a prestigious firm, simply looked down at his hands, his face flushed with what I recognized as second-hand embarrassment. He wouldn't defend me. He never did. "If you pursue this hobby," my mother said, her voice brittle as glass, "you will do it without our support, financial or otherwise. The trust fund your grandfather set up for your education will be frozen. You will be entirely on your own." It was the ultimate threat, the one she believed would bring me to heel. The withdrawal of money, and with it, the withdrawal of love, or at least, their version of it. I looked around the room at the faces of my family. My father's rigid disappointment, my mother's cold ultimatum, Heather's smug condescension, Ethan's silent shame. In that moment, I realized that the approval I had been chasing my entire life was a mirage. It would only ever be granted if I erased myself completely and became the person they wanted me to be. And the price for that approval was too high. "I know," I said, my voice steady now. The fear was gone, replaced by a strange, liberating certainty. "I'm prepared for that." I didn't wait for them to respond. I turned and walked out of the living room, up the grand staircase to my childhood bedroom. The room still looked like it belonged to a teenager, a person I no longer was. I pulled a small suitcase from the back of my closet and began to pack. Not the designer clothes my mother had bought me, but the practical things: worn jeans, comfortable sweaters, my collection of cookbooks, and the worn notebook filled with my own recipes. I left behind the life of Dara Mitchell, the disappointing daughter of Greenwich. I walked out of that house an hour later, the front door closing with a soft, final click behind me. I didn't look back. I left that night with nothing but my personal savings from my secret supper club, a small suitcase, and a single business card that promised me nothing but a chance. It was the poorest I had ever been, and the freest. The next 5 years were a brutal, beautiful education. New York City wasn't the glamorous dream depicted in movies. For me, it was a crucible. I moved into a tiny, showbox-sized room in a fourth-floor walk-up in Queens, sharing the cramped apartment with 3 other girls, who were also chasing their own impossible dreams. The rent, even for my small slice of the city, consumed most of my meager savings within months. The financial cushion my family had always provided was gone, and the reality of that was a constant, gnawing anxiety. My life became a relentless cycle of work, study, and exhaustion. Chef Laurent was a man of his word. He gave me a trial, a stage in the relentless, high-pressure environment of his 3 Michelin-star restaurant, Le Verret. The kitchen was a symphony of controlled chaos, a world of scorching heat, gleaming steel, and the constant roar of the ventilation hoods. My first roll was the lowest on the ladder, commis chef. My days started at 5 a.m., long before the sun rose over the East River. I peeled potatoes, shucked oysters, picked tiny leaves off thyme sprigs for hours, and cleaned an endless mountain of pots and pans. My hands were perpetually chapped, my arms dotted with a constellation of small burns and cuts. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by stale coffee and sheer determination, often falling asleep on the subway ride home, only to wake up a few hours later and do it all again. Many nights, I'd lie in my narrow bed, my body aching with a fatigue so deep it felt like it had settled in my bones, and I'd wonder if Heather had been right. The doubt was a persistent whisper, telling me I had made a terrible mistake, that I had thrown away a life of comfort and security for this grueling, thankless labor. But then, a moment of magic would happen in the kitchen. I'd watch Chef Laurent transform a simple leek into a work of art, or I'd finally master the technique for a perfect hollandaise sauce, and the fire inside me would roar back to life. This was real. This was honest work. I was building something with my own hands. I enrolled in night classes at a local culinary institute, using student loans to pay the tuition. I'd finish my grueling shift at Le Verret, race across town to a 3-hour class on butchery or pastry, and then study on the train ride home. I was perpetually exhausted, but I was also learning at a ferocious pace. Under Chef Laurent's mentorship, I thrived. He was a demanding, terrifying teacher who never gave praise lightly. A curt passable from him was the equivalent of a standing ovation from anyone else. But he saw my hunger, my unwavering commitment, and he began to invest in me. He pushed me harder than anyone else, forcing me to refine my palate, to understand the science behind the art, to never, ever settle for mediocrity. Slowly, I climbed the rigid hierarchy of the French kitchen brigade, from commis to chef de partie, in charge of my own station. The kitchen's intensity, the discipline, the creative idiot fed something in me that business school never could. Through all of this, I maintained my distance from my family. The separation was a clean break. There were occasional, stilted phone calls with my mother, usually initiated by her around holidays. The conversations were always the same. Are you eating properly? Is it too late to reconsider your MBA? Heather just made junior partner. She never asked if I was happy. She only asked if I was ready to admit my failure. I kept my answers short and non-committal. I sent birthday and Christmas cards, polite, impersonal gestures to show I was still alive. They knew I was doing something with food, but the details were a blurry, unimpressive picture in their minds. They imagined me in a hairnet, serving greasy food at a diner. I let them. I kept my actual life, my slow, hard-won progress, entirely to myself. I wanted recognition for my accomplishments on my own terms, not as a desperate plea to finally earn their approval. The opportunity that would change everything came on a sweltering Tuesday night, 2.5 years ago. I was now Chef Laurent's sous chef, his second in command. He had been invited to cook a private dinner for a group of powerful investors, and he'd entrusted me with creating and executing the dessert course. I made a deconstructed lemon tart, a base of sable crumb, lemon curd spheres made through spherification, torched meringue kisses, and a basil-infused olive oil. It was ambitious, modern, and a complete reflection of my culinary voice. One of the guests, a man named James Warren who ran a boutique venture capital firm, asked to meet the person responsible for the dessert. When Chef Laurent brought me out from the kitchen, James's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He had been expecting a seasoned pastry chef, not a woman in her mid-20s. He asked about my background, my training, my ambitions. He listened with an intensity that I wasn't used to. At the end of our conversation, he handed me his card, the second card that would alter the course of my life. When you're ready to open your own place, he said, call me. I don't invest in restaurants. I invest in talent. It took another year of saving every penny, of working tirelessly to refine my unique culinary vision, and of writing a meticulous, 100-page business plan. I used every lesson from that dreaded MBA program I had abandoned, applying principles of supply chain management, marketing, and financial forecasting to my passion. The irony wasn't lost on me. I finally called James Warren. He and two of his partners provided the capital. 2 years ago, Maison opened its doors. I chose the name myself. It's French for house or home. I wanted to create a place that felt like the sanctuary my kitchen had always been for me. I was the executive chef and a partial owner. The restaurant was an immediate, stunning success. We were booked out for months within the first few weeks. The critics raved. 6 months after we opened, the restaurant was so profitable that I secured a business loan and bought out my partners. I became the sole proprietor. Last month, Food and Wine magazine featured us in their Future of American Cuisine issue, with a full-page photo of me in my chef's whites. My face was on newsstands across the country, but I knew my family would never see it. It wasn't the kind of publication they read. So, when the embossed, cream-colored invitation to Heather's engagement dinner arrived at my apartment, I was surprised. Even more shocking was the location, my own restaurant. Of course, they couldn't know it was mine. My name wasn't on the door. The brand was Maison, not Dara Mitchell. They had probably chosen it because it was exclusive and impressive. The perfect backdrop for showcasing their status and Heather's brilliant match. For days, I debated whether to go. Part of me wanted to decline, to maintain the safe distance I had cultivated. But another part, a quieter, more curious part, felt a pull. 5 years of distance had given me perspective. I wasn't that wounded young woman anymore. I was secure in my success, in who I had become. I decided to accept, not to seek validation, but perhaps to finally close a chapter. I was ready to face them without crumbling under their judgment. What I hadn't anticipated, what I couldn't possibly prepare for, was how it would feel to watch them sit in my dining room, in the home I had built from nothing, and criticize the very dishes I had poured my heart and soul into creating. But that was exactly what awaited me as I pushed open the heavy glass doors of Maison that evening, my simple black dress feeling like both armor and a costume. I was ready to play the role of the struggling, black sheep daughter one last time. The familiar scent of Maison enveloped me the moment I stepped inside. It was a complex symphony the first had personally composed, the rich, earthy notes of saffron from the risotto special, the sweet aroma of wine reducing for a sauce, and the subtle, clean perfume of fresh herbs that I insisted on having delivered twice daily, from a hydroponic farm upstate. Usually, this aroma centered me, a tangible reminder of everything I had built. Tonight, it only sharpened the knot of anxiety in my stomach. The hostess stand was bathed in a soft, warm light, and the low hum of conversation and the gentle clinking of silverware created an energy that was both sophisticated and welcoming. This was my world, and tonight, my two worlds were about to collide. I had chosen my outfit with the deliberate precision of a chef plating a crucial dish. The simple black dress was a vintage Diane von Furstenberg, its understated elegance a secret I would keep for myself. My only accessory was a single strand of pearls that had belonged to my grandmother's one family heirloom I had taken with me. My hair was pulled back into a sleek chignon, a practical style for the kitchen that I knew my mother would interpret as my not being able to afford a proper salon visit. I was playing a part, and the costume had to be perfect. Marcus, my Mactor D and most trusted senior staff member, spotted me immediately from across the dining room. His eyes, usually so composed, widened slightly in question. I rarely came in through the front entrance, and never as a guest. I gave him the subtle shake of my head and mouthed the words, "Not yet." He was a consummate professional. He understood instantly. He gave a discreet nod and turned his attention back to seating a couple at a corner table. From the entryway, I could already see them. They had been given the best table in the house, of course table 7, in the center of the room, an intimate semicircular booth that offered a panoramic view of the entire dining room. My staff, knowing it was my preferred table, had seated them there out of respect for the reservation's VIP notation. never imagining the VIP was me. My mother, impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit, was surveying the room with a critical eye. My father was examining the wine list with an exaggerated concentration. A performance of connoisseurship. Heather was draped in a silk dress that shimmered under the low-light snooze-season Gucci. I recognized, and seated next to her was a man I didn't know. He had slick-back hair and a ridiculously expensive watch that caught the light every time he moved his wrist. This had to be Bradley, the fiancé. Ethan and his wife, Allison, completed the picture-perfect tableau, both still in formal business attire as though they'd come straight from closing a major deal. Celeste, my charming and unflappable hostess, approached me with a warm smile. "Good evening." She caught herself just in time, her training kicking in. I had drilled into my staff that my privacy was paramount. "Your party is already seated. May I show you to their table?" "Thank you, Celeste," I murmured, appreciating her quick recovery and discretion. As we approached the table, my mother noticed me. Her eyes performed the quick, ruthless assessment I remembered so vividly from childhood. A head-to-toe scan that calculated the approximate value of my appearance and, as always, found it wanting. "Dara," she said, rising to air-kiss the space beside my cheeks, her perfume enveloping me in a cloud of expensive nostalgia. "You finally made it. We were beginning to wonder." "I'm exactly on time, Mother," I replied coolly, glancing at my watch. 7 o'clock on the dot. My father stood, giving me a stiff, awkward hug that ended with a pat on the back that felt more like a dismissal. "You look healthy," he offered. In the Mitchell family lexicon, healthy was a euphemism for "you've put on weight." It was the opposite of the borderline and healthy slenderness prized in their social circle. Heather barely bothered to stand, simply offering her cheek for me to lean in and kiss. "Dara, this is Bradley," she announced, her voice dripping with possessive pride. Her fiancé rose and extended his hand. His grip was too firm, a textbook power move I recognized from countless meetings with aggressive vendors and investors. "Bradley Harrington," he introduced himself, as if announcing a brand. "Princeton undergrad, Wharton MBA, just made junior partner at Goldman Sachs. There was no "nice to meet you." "No, I've heard so much about you." Just a recitation of his credentials, the Mitchell family's preferred love language. Ethan gave me a more genuine greeting, a quick hug and a soft, "Good to see you, Dar." His wife, Allison, however, had a smile that seemed strained. I would later learn that she had been the one tasked with finding this impressively exclusive restaurant for the dinner, and she was desperately nervous about whether it would meet her in-laws' impossible standards. "Well," my mother said as I took the last empty seat, the leather of the booth cool against my skin, "we've already ordered champagne. I hope that's acceptable." She gestured to the bottle of Krug chilling in a silver bucket beside the table. I noticed they'd chosen the most expensive non-vintage option on our list. Showy, but not recklessly extravagant. Typical. Around us, the restaurant hummed with the precise energy I had worked so hard to cultivate. The lighting was dim enough for intimacy, but bright enough to appreciate the artful plating of each dish. The acoustics were perfectly balanced, allowing for private conversation while still feeling the vibrant energy of a full house. Every detail, from the weight of the custom-forged silverware to the thread count of the linen napkins, had been my decision. I watched my staff move with a quiet, efficient grace, their subtle reactions as they began to realize I was sitting with guests a silent, unfolding drama only I could fully appreciate. Jose, our sommelier, caught my eye as he approached with the champagne. He was a master of his craft, a man I had personally poached from a 3-star restaurant in Paris. The slightest raise of his eyebrow asked the question, "Do I acknowledge you?" I gave him an imperceptible shake of my head. "Excellent choice," he said to my father instead, presenting the bottle with practiced elegance before beginning the pour. "We're celebrating an engagement," my father announced unnecessarily, puffing out his chest slightly, clearly hoping his importance would be recognized with special treatment. "Congratulations," Jose replied smoothly, his face a mask of professional poise. "Mason is honored to host such a special occasion. I'm surprised you managed to get a reservation," I said innocently. Turning to Allison, "I've heard it's quite difficult." Bradley leaned forward, eager to take credit. "I know people," he said with a smug wink. "Had to call in a favor with a client who's friendly with the management." I had to suppress an eye roll. The client was likely Craig Winters, one of our regular investors who occasionally requested tables for his business associates. I made a mental note to have a quiet word with Craig about his choice of friends. "Well, aren't you resourceful?" I murmured, raising my champagne flute. "To Heather and Bradley, a perfect match and a brilliant future," my father toasted, his voice booming slightly. We all clinked glasses. I took a small, deliberate sip, noting with satisfaction that the champagne was served at the precise 47 degrees Fahrenheit I had trained my staff to maintain. "So," my mother began, setting down her glass and fixing her full attention on me. It felt like an interrogation light had been switched on. "Tell us what you've been up to all these years. Dara, you've been so mysterious." The entire table's focus shifted to me. 5 pairs of eyes, evaluating, ready to judge. "I've been working," I said simply, "in the food industry, learning, growing, still with that cooking phase." Heather sighed, as if I'd just admitted to a regrettable, long-running addiction. "I thought surely by now you'd have moved on to something more substantial." "Not everyone is cut out for the corporate path," Ethan added. He meant it as a defense, I think, but it came out sounding like a criticism, a confirmation of my lesser abilities. Bradley looked at me with open confusion. "So what is it you do? Exactly? Are you a chef? Line cook? Catering? Private events? Various roles?" I answered vaguely, letting them fill in the blanks with their own limited, condescending assumptions. "I've worn many hats." "Well, we're just glad you're managing to support yourself," my mother said with a tone of magnanimous charity that set my teeth on edge. "Though we've always said, our door is open if things ever get too challenging." The unspoken addendum was, when you finally come to your senses and admit you were wrong. Just then, Jessica, one of our most experienced and poised servers, approached with the amuse-bouche, a single, perfect bite I had designed to awaken the palate. It was a sphere of compressed watermelon infused with elderflower, topped with a dollop of fermented black garlic puree and a single micro-basil leaf I had sourced from a specialized urban farm in Brooklyn. "Compliments of the kitchen," Jessica announced, carefully placing one of the small, elegant plates before each diner. Her eyes met mine for a brief, flickering moment, a flash of shared knowledge and loyalty, before she slipped back into her professional role. "Is this all?" Heather asked, poking at the single bite with her fork, her disappointment palpable. "I'm absolutely famished. It's an amuse-bouche, Heather," I explained, my voice patient, a little bite to entertain the mouth. "The meal hasn't actually started yet." "I know what an amuse-bouche is, Dara," she snapped, her defensiveness flaring. "I'm not some uncultured savage just because I chose law school over playing with food." I watched as they each tasted my creation. My mother took the smallest, most delicate bite possible, ever conscious of calories. My father popped the whole thing in his mouth at once, chewing for a moment before swallowing, barely registering the complex flavors. Ethan and Allison, to their credit, seemed to genuinely appreciate it. Bradley made a show of analyzing the flavors like a wine connoisseur, using nonsensical terms like a rather aggressive mouthfeel and a surprisingly bold finish for a fruit. Only Heather left hers untouched. "I don't do raw garlic," she declared, pushing the plate away slightly. The black garlic was anything but raw. It had been fermented for 60 days in a temperature-controlled environment, a painstaking process I had spent years perfecting to create its sweet, balsamic-like flavor. But I said nothing. As Jessica cleared the small plates, I caught the flash of disappointment in her eyes at seeing Heather's untouched creation. In that moment, I felt a surge of protectiveness, not for myself, but for my staff, for the pride they took in our work. I had built Mason not just as a business, but as a family of Sortzone bound by a shared passion for excellence, not by blood and obligation. The evening was just beginning, but already, the old, suffocating dynamics were settling in like a familiar shroud. I was the outsider, the odd one out, the one whose life choices required constant justification. But unlike the Dara of 5 years ago, I now sat at this table with a secret strength, a quiet power that was about to turn this entire dynamic on its head. So, tell us about the wedding plans, I said, deliberately shifting the spotlight back to Heather. It was a strategic move, a way to deflect the interrogation and observe. As our first official course arrivated delicate composition of heirloom tomatoes, house-made stracciatella cheese, and a vibrant basil oil that had taken me months to perfect. The other brightened immediately, taking the bait. Well, we've booked St. Thomas Church. Of course, she began, ticking off the details like items on a prestigious resume. And the reception will be at the plaza. We've capped the guest list at 400. 400? I echoed, genuinely surprised. That seems enormous. The guest list is getting unwieldy. My mother interjected, her voice laced with the serious, stressed tone she usually reserved for discussions about the stock market. The Astors aren't speaking to the Vanderbilts since that unfortunate yachting incident in the Hamptons, so we can't seat them in the same ballroom section. And Richard's business partner insists on bringing his entire extended family. I suppressed a smile. The sheer gravity with which they navigated these intricate social calculations never ceased to amaze me. To them, this wasn't a party. It was a high-stakes diplomatic summit. Bradley leaned forward, a condescending smirk on his face. It's not just a celebration, Dara. It's networking. Half those invitations are relationship investments. A wedding of this caliber opens doors, solidifies alliances. Precisely. My father agreed, nodding at his future son-in-law with obvious approval. Bradley understands the social capital aspect of these things. The conversation continued in this vein, a dizzying back and forth about caterers, floral arrangements that cost more than my first car, and the strategic importance of the seating chart. I listened quietly, taking a small bite of the tomato dish. The tomatoes were perfectly ripe, bursting with the sweet, acidic taste of late summer. The creamy stracciatella balanced it beautifully, and the basil oil added a fresh, herbaceous note. It was a simple dish, but one that relied on the absolute perfection of its ingredients. It was one of my favorites. Then, the spotlight swung back to me with the jarring abruptness of a pendulum. "And what about you, Dara?" Heather asked, her tone suddenly sharp. I noticed she had barely touched her food, merely pushing the vibrant red and white ingredients around her plate. "Any prospects on your horizon? Or are you still too busy with your cooking?" The word hung in the air, weighted with her disdain. "I'm focused on my career right now," I answered simply, refusing to be drawn into her game. "Career," Ethan repeated with a small, almost involuntary laugh. "Is that what we're calling it now?" He tried to soften the blow with a shrug, but the sting was there. My mother, ever the matchmaker, jumped in. "Dara, dear, surely at 29 you're thinking about settling down. Time does march on. There's that lovely son of Margaret Whitlies in hospital administration. I believe. A very stable, respectable field. I'm not looking to be set up." "Mother," I said, my jaw tightening. "Well, your options will become more limited with each passing year," she persisted, her voice a mixture of concern and judgment. "Especially in your situation." Before I had to formulate a response to that thinly veiled insult, Jessica appeared to clear the course. I realized I'd barely registered the taste of my own creation, the tension at the table having soured my palate. My stomach was a tight, angry knot. Was there a problem with the dish, Miss? Jessica asked Heather, her professional training dictating that she inquire about the nearly full plate. "It was too acidic," Heather replied dismissively, without making eye contact. "And the tomatoes could have been riper." I bit the inside of my cheek. Hard. Too acidic. I had personally checked the pH balance of the vinaigrette that afternoon. Not ripe enough. Those tomatoes had been hand-selected at their absolute peak that very morning, from an organic farm upstate that grew them exclusively for Mason. Jessica, to her credit, didn't flinch. "I'm very sorry to hear that," she said with practiced diplomacy. "I will be sure to inform the kitchen." She gave me a quick, almost imperceptible glance that said, "Don't worry. I know she's wrong." The next course arrived, seared diver scallops with a brown butter emulsion and pickled ramps, a spring special I was particularly proud of. As the plates were set down, I watched my family's reactions. "Now, this looks more promising," my father declared, immediately cutting into a plump scallop with his fork. Bradley swirled his wine, a Sancerre I had personally selected to pair with this exact dish. "Decent wine list here," he announced to the table. "Not exceptional, of course, but passable for a place like this." Jose, who was refilling water glasses nearby, overheard this. His back stiffened for a fraction of a second before he regained his composure. He shot me a quick glance across the room, his eyes full of indignant fire on my behalf. I gave him a subtle smile that I hoped conveyed both amusement and appreciation. The man had curated a wine list that had been nominated for a James Beard Award. Calling it passable was like calling a Rembrandt decently painted. "So, Dara," Allison began, ever the peacemaker, clearly trying to include me in a less confrontational way. "Ethan mentioned you're working in food, but you never really specified. What exactly is it that you do?" Before I could construct another vague, non-committal answer, Heather cut in, her voice dripping with condescension. "She's probably a hostess somewhere." "Right, Dara, putting that business degree to good use seating people and handing out menus." "Actually," I started, intending to finally say something more concrete. "There's no shame in that," my father interrupted, completely missing the malice in Heather's tone. "Everyone has to start somewhere. Though I must say, after 5 years, I would have expected some level of advancement." "I have advanced," I said quietly, the words feeling heavy and useless. "Into what? Assistant manager at Applebee's?" Heather laughed at her own joke, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Heather," Ethan warned, a rare moment of sibling defense. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. "What? I'm just being realistic," she retorted, turning on him. "She's the one who chose to abandon her education for this little passion project. Actions have consequences." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, allowing the clean, mineral notes of the Sancerre to center me, to wash away the bitter taste of her words. "And how's the law treating you, Heather?" I asked, my voice even. "Still at Henderson and Block?" Her perfectly composed expression tightened, just for a second, but I saw it. "I'm between positions at the moment." "Actually," she said, quickly smoothing over the crack in her facade, taking some time to focus on planning the wedding. She was working far too many hours. Bradley interjected smoothly, placing a proprietary hand on her arm. "I told her my wife doesn't need to kill herself at some soulless firm. She can focus on charity work and sit on boards, like my mother does." I saw another flash of something in Heather's eyes then. Was it resentment? Frustration? It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a placid, agreeable smile. But I had seen it. The golden child's perfect life wasn't quite as perfect as it seemed. The pasta course arrived, a dish featuring hand-rolled tagliatelle with spring peas, pancetta, and fresh mint. It was one of our signature dishes, the one that had been praised in the food and wine article. "The portion sizes here are just ridiculous," my mother commented, looking down at the artfully plated nest of pasta. "All this expense for 3 bites of food. It's about quality over quantity." "Mother," I replied, my patience wearing thin, "a tasting menu is designed to take you on a journey through multiple flavors and textures without overwhelming you. In my day, a restaurant gave you a proper meal for your money." My father grumbled, joining the chorus of criticism. This nouvelle cuisine nonsense is just a clever way to charge more for less food. I watched in silent horror as Bradley, instead of twirling his pasta with a fork and spoon, cut into the delicate strands with the side of his fork, mangling the tender noodles I had personally rolled by hand that morning. It was a small act of barbarism that felt like a personal insult. Then Heather, emboldened by the group's complaints, turned her interrogation back to the one subject that truly interested her, my supposed failure. "So, how exactly are you affording a place like this on a food service salary, Dara?" she asked bluntly, her fork hovering over her mutilated pasta. "This is one of the most expensive restaurants in the city." The conversational hum at our table died instantly. All eyes turned back to me. The trial had resumed. "I manage my finances carefully," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "Oh, please," Heather scoffed, setting her fork down with a clatter. "A single dinner here costs more than you probably make in a day. Who are you dating? Is he paying for all this?" "I'm not dating anyone," I said, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Then how?" she pressed, leaning forward like a prosecutor closing in on a witness. "How can you possibly afford this place? Are you in debt? Are you maxing out your credit cards just to keep up appearances with us tonight?" "Heather," Ethan warned again, his voice tight with embarrassment. "No, I want to know," she insisted, her voice rising slightly. "We all rearranged our busy schedules for this dinner. A dinner you agreed to at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Either you're being financially irresponsible, or you're not being honest about your situation." The air crackled with tension. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the feeling of being cornered, judged, and found wanting before I'd even had a chance to speak. But I wasn't that insecure young woman from Greenwich anymore. I had survived the fiery crucible of a 3-star kitchen. I had built this empire around us, brick by brick, dish by dish, and I was done being their punching bag. Before I could formulate a reply, the main course arrived, a temporary reprieve. For the others, it was a perfectly cooked duck breast with a cherry gastrique and a bed of nutty farro. For me, it was a moment to regroup, to breathe. Chef Miranda, my formidable chef de cuisine who ran the kitchen when I wasn't on the line, had executed it flawlessly. I could see from across the table the crisp, mahogany skin and the perfect medium-rare blush of the meat. It was a dish that required immense technical skill, and my team had delivered. Bradley took one bite and immediately set his fork down with a look of theatrical disgust. "This duck is undercooked," he announced loudly, as if addressing a courtroom. I looked at his plate. The duck wasn't undercooked. It was perfect. "It's meant to be served that way," I explained, my voice tight with restraint. "Medium rare is the optimal temperature to ensure the meat is tender and flavorful. If you cook it further, it becomes tough. I don't care how it's meant to be," he declared, waving a dismissive hand. "I prefer my meat well done." He motioned sharply for the nearest server. It was Jessica again. She approached the table, her expression a perfect mask of polite concern. "This is raw," Bradley said, pointing at his plate without even looking at her. "Take it back and have the chef cook it properly." I saw the flash of professional indignation in Jessica's eyes, quickly masked by practiced courtesy. In our world, sending back a perfectly cooked piece of meat with a demand to ruin it was the ultimate insult to a chef's skill. "Of course, sir. My apologies," she murmured, taking his plate. As she turned, her eyes met mine for a split second. I gave her a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She would understand. She would take it to the kitchen and have them fire a new breast for him, cooked to the dry, leathery consistency he desired. We would never ruin a perfectly good piece of meat by simply throwing it back on the heat. "Really, Dara," my mother said once Jessica had departed, her tone one of weary disappointment, "you still haven't answered Heather's question. We're all concerned. How are you affording this dinner?" The tension at the table was now a palpable thing, thick and suffocating. All their collective judgment, their preconceived notions of my failure, were focused on this single, pragmatic point. For a moment, I considered ending the charade right then and there. I pictured the words forming on my lips. I'm affording it because every dollar you're spending tonight comes directly to me. I imagined their shocked faces, the sputtering disbelief. But the moment wasn't right. The final act of this drama hadn't played out yet. Bradley's overcooked duck returned. He sliced into it, and from across the table, I could see it had none of the tenderness or juiciness of the original. It was gray and tough. Much better, he declared with satisfaction, chewing on the ruined meat. My father, perhaps feeling the meal was not quite opulent enough, signaled for the wine list again. Let's order another bottle, he announced. Something a bit more impressive this time. Jose approached with the heavy, leather-bound list. My father made a great show of examining it, running his finger down the pages of French Bordeaux before landing on one of our most expensive and rarest selections, a Chateau Margaux priced at over $800. This one, he said, tapping the page. This should be adequate. I knew that bottle intimately. I had personally selected it during a buying trip to France last year, meeting with the vintner and tasting it in their ancient cellars. It was a spectacular, complex, and delicate wine, and it was completely, utterly wrong for the courses they were eating and the dessert that was to follow. It was a choice born not of knowledge, but of a desire to display wealth. May I suggest something else? I ventured, trying to be diplomatic. That's a beautiful wine, but it might not pair well with the remaining dishes. We have a Californian Cabernet that would complement the... My father waved me off with an irritated flick of his wrist. I think I know my wines. Dara, we'll have the Margaux. Jose caught my eye, his expression a silent question, asking for direction. I gave him a small, resigned nod. Let him have his way. This wasn't the hill to die on. The battle I needed to win wasn't about wine pairings. As the evening progressed through the final savory course and into dessert a deconstructed lemon tart, the very dish that had launched my career with jabs and criticisms continued. Every dish was met with some minor complaint. The cheese course was too pungent. The sorbet was too sweet. The dessert, according to Heather, looked like something that had been dropped on the floor. Every attempt I made to contribute to the conversation about their lives was somehow twisted back into an indictment of mine. By the time the coffee was served, I felt emotionally drained. The double burden of enduring my family's casual cruelty, while simultaneously watching them thoughtlessly tear apart my life's work, was becoming unbearable. This restaurant, this food, this experience site was the most intimate, personal part of me, and they were treating it with the same careless disdain they had always treated me. Then came the moment I had been both dreading and anticipating. The check. Marcus, who had been observing the table from a discreet distance all night, approached with the black leather folder containing the bill. He placed it, as is customary, in the center of the table. My father, acting on a lifetime of patriarchal reflex, reached for it immediately, but Bradley, ever the performer, intercepted it with a practiced smoothness. Please, Richard, allow me, he said, his voice oozing magnanimity. Consider it my treat, a small gesture to celebrate the happy occasion. My father made the expected token protest before graciously acquiescing. I watched as Bradley opened the folder. I saw his confident smile falter, just for a second, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly as he registered the total at the bottom of the bill. His expression shifted from easy generosity to barely concealed shock. Is there a problem, Bradley? My father asked, noticing the change. No, not at all. Bradley recovered quickly, forcing a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. Just confirming the calculation. I knew exactly what he was looking at. A tasting menu for 6, plus my own abbreviated meal, 2 bottles of premium champagne, and that $800 Bordeaux would easily run well over $3,000. Not an outrageous sum for a restaurant of Messon's caliber, but certainly a statement and perhaps a larger one than Bradley had intended to make. He reached into his jacket, extracting a black American Express Centurion card with a deliberate slowness, making sure everyone at the table noticed the exclusive high-status piece of metal. Heather, perhaps sensing his discomfort, or perhaps just seeing one last opportunity for a final, decisive blow, chose that exact moment to circle back to her earlier interrogation. "So, Dara," she said, her voice dripping with a false, syrupy sweetness, "you never did tell us how you're managing to contribute to this little extravagance. We wouldn't want you stretching yourself financially on our account." All eyes turned to me again. The final judgment. I could feel the familiar dynamic asserting itself one last time. Heather, the successful one, generously offering to cover for me. The struggling, irresponsible disappointment. "I can cover my portion," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Can you, though?" She pressed, leaning forward, her eyes glinting with a cruel sort of triumph. "Because we all know what food service pays. Let's be honest for a second. Can you even afford to eat here?" The table fell silent. The question, so baldly and deliberately insulting, hung in the air. Even my parents looked momentarily uncomfortable. "Heather," my mother murmured, awake, token protest. "Perhaps this isn't the place." "No, I want to know," Heather insisted, her eyes locked on mine. "We've spent this entire evening pretending that everything's fine, that Dara's choice to throw away her future hasn't left her struggling. I think we all deserve a little honesty." I felt a hot flush rising from my chest to my face. 5 years of distance, of building my own life and my own success. And in their eyes, nothing had changed. I was still the family charity case, still the one being asked to justify my very existence at their table. Bradley, perhaps sensing an opportunity to reassert his dominance after the shock of the check, decided to join in. "She's right, Dara. If you need a little help with your portion, just say so. There's no shame in it." "I don't need help," I said, my voice tight. "Then how exactly are you paying for this?" Heather demanded, her voice rising. "Because a single meal here costs more than you probably make in a week." I opened my mouth to respond, the truth finally ready to spill out, when Bradley suddenly frowned at the bill again. "Wait a minute," he announced, his voice sharp with indignation. "There's a mistake here." He signaled sharply for Marcus. "Excuse me, waiter, there's an error on our check." Marcus approached our table with a calm, unhurried grace, as though he hadn't been watching the entire drama unfold from across the room. My staff was loyal, and they were protective. He had likely been waiting for his cue. "Is there a problem, sir?" he asked Bradley, his tone perfectly neutral. "Yes, there's a problem," Bradley said, tapping the bill with an indignant finger. "You've made an error. You've only charged us for the beverages, not for the meal itself." He held up the check for Marcus to see, a triumphant look on his face, as if he had uncovered a grand conspiracy. Marcus took the leather folder. He glanced at the bill. Then he looked directly at me. His expression was a carefully blank slate, but his eyes asked a clear question. "How do you want to play this?" In that split second, I made my decision. The game was over. The charade had gone on long enough. I gave Marcus the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. He turned his attention back to Bradley, his demeanor shifting from neutral politeness to a smooth, confident authority. "There's no error, sir," Marcus said, his voice clear and resonant in the sudden quiet of the table. "The dinner portion has been taken care of." "Taken care of?" my father asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. "By whom? Did you mention this was a special occasion?" Marcus didn't look at my father. He didn't look at Heather or Bradley. He turned his body slightly, angling himself to address me directly, a gesture of deference and respect that was unmistakable. His professional mask dissolved, replaced by a warm, genuine smile. "Welcome back, Miss Dara," he said, his voice now filled with a warmth that was entirely absent before. The shift was so profound it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Everything is, of course, on the house tonight." He paused, then added, "Your usual table in the private dining room is ready for your meeting with the investors. By the way, Shall I let them know you're running a few minutes behind? The silence that fell over the table was absolute, a void so complete it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. It was heavier than the silence after I announced I was dropping out of my MBA. Heavier than any disapproving glare my father had ever given me. 6 pairs of eyes swiveled from Marcus to me, their expressions a slow-motion cascade of confusion, disbelief, and the dawning, staggering light of understanding. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice miraculously steady despite the adrenaline singing through my veins. "Yes, please close out Mr. Harrington's beverage tab." I glanced at Bradley, whose jaw was now hanging slightly open. "The rest is taken care of." "Very good, Miss Dara," Marcus replied with a crisp nod. He took the folder and Bradley's black card from the table. As he turned to leave, he added, "Oh, and Chef Miranda asked me to tell you she'd like your final opinion on the new spring menu items, when you have a moment." "Of course," I replied. "I'll stop by the kitchen before my meeting." As Marcus departed, leaving a wake of stunned silence, I finally allowed myself to look at my family. Really look at them. My mother's perfectly lipsticked mouth was a small O of shock. My father's face was a storm of conflicting emotions, his calculating mind clearly struggling to process this new, impossible data. Ethan was just staring at me, his expression one of pure, unadulterated astonishment. And Heather looked as if she had been slapped. What is happening?" My mother finally managed to whisper, her hand fluttering to the pearls at her throat, a gesture I recognized as her go-to move when she felt socially destabilized. I took a sip of water, the cool liquid a welcome relief from my suddenly dry throat. I set the glass down with a quiet, deliberate click. The sound seemed to echo in the silence. The moment I had both dreaded and secretly fantasized about for 5 long years had finally arrived. "Welcome to Mason," I said, my voice calm and even. "My restaurant." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. My father was the first to find his voice, his expression shifting from confusion to a rapid, mental recalculation. "Your restaurant," he repeated carefully, testing the words. "You mean, you work here? As the manager?" "No, father," I clarified, feeling a strange, serene calm settle over me. The power dynamic of our entire lives had just irrevocably shifted, and the feeling was dizzying, liberating. "I don't work at Mason. I own Mason. I'm the executive chef and sole proprietor." "That's impossible," Heather blurted out, the words a reflexive denial. "This is one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. It's been featured in magazines." "Yes," I agreed with a small nod. "Food and Wine last month. Bon Appetit before that. And the New York Times gave us a 4-star review last year." Bradley was staring at me as though I had suddenly grown a second head. But you said, you told us you just worked in food." He stammered, his earlier confidence completely shattered. "You were so vague about everything." "Because I wanted to see," I said, my voice hardening slightly as I looked from face to face. "I wanted to see how you would all treat me if you thought I was struggling. If you thought I was a failure. And you've all made that abundantly, painfully clear tonight. Darling." "Why?" my mother pleaded, her voice taking on a strained, coaxing tone. "Why wouldn't you tell us about such a magnificent achievement?" The way she emphasized the word achievement spoke volumes. My passion was only valid now that it came with a price tag and public acclaim. "Would you like the full story?" I asked, not waiting for an answer. After I left home 5 years ago, I moved to the city with less than $2,000 to my name. For the first year, I worked 3 jobs. Prep cook at a bistro from 5 a.m. to noon. Line cook at a steakhouse in Midtown from 1 p.m. to 10 p.m. and weekend shifts at a bakery to make rent. I slept for hours a night. I lived on staff meals and instant noodles. I let the images sink in, watching their uncomfortable expressions. Chef Laurent took me under his wing. I became his sous chef 2.5 years ago. An investor tasted my food and offered to back me. We found this space. It was a failed nightclub back then, I designed the concept. I developed every recipe on the menu you just ate. I hired and trained every single member of the staff. I oversaw every detail, from the lighting fixtures to the custom plates you just criticized. But the cost, my father said. His mind still stuck on the finances, the only metric he truly understood. A restaurant of this caliber, in this location, the initial investment must have been millions. 3.4 million. I confirmed, enjoying the look of shock on his face. I became the sole owner just over a year ago. I bought out my partners. So that's why you agreed to meet here, Heather said, the realization dawning on her, her voice small and hollow. You knew all along. This was all some kind of test. Actually, no. I corrected her gently. That's the irony. Allison chose this restaurant. Isn't that right, Allison? All eyes turned to Ethan's wife, who blushed a deep, painful red. I had no idea. Dara, she stammered. The concierge at Ethan's firm recommended it. He said it was the most impressive new restaurant in the city. I swear, I didn't know it was yours. Of course you didn't, I assured her. No one in the family knew. That was entirely by design. But why keep it a secret? My mother pressed, her voice trembling slightly. We're your family. We would have been so proud. A short, sharp laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Would you have been, Mother, proud? Is this the same family who told me cooking was servant's work? The same family who cut me off completely the second I chose my own path? The same family who, just a few minutes ago, was mocking me, pitying me, and asking if I could even afford to be here? My voice was rising now. 5 years of frustration and hurt finally boiling over. You're not proud of me, I said, my gaze sweeping across their stunned faces. You're impressed by this. I gestured around the elegant, successful dining room. This success, this money, this status, this is a language you understand. My passion was never enough. It only has value to you now that it's been validated by a 4-star review and a healthy profit margin. At that moment, as if summoned by the sheer dramatic tension, Chef Miranda appeared at my side in her crisp white uniform. Sorry to interrupt, Chef, she said, her presence a solid, grounding force. The Matsuhisa party has arrived for their tasting, and Savannah from the magazine is on the line to confirm your interview for next week's feature. Also, your publisher called again about the final cover designs for the cookbook. Cookbook, Heather echoed faintly, as if she couldn't possibly process another piece of information. Coming out this fall, I confirmed, turning briefly to Miranda. Thank you. Tell Savannah I'll call her back in the morning, and let the Matsuhisa party know I'll be with them shortly. As Miranda departed, I rose from my seat, the napkin from my lap falling to the floor. Unnoticed, I looked down at the 6 people who shared my DNA but had, until this moment, never truly seen me. They were silent, their faces a mixture of shock, shame, and a dawning, uncomfortable respect. I have a business to run, I said, my voice now devoid of anger, replaced by a quiet, unshakable finality. Thank you for coming to my restaurant. I hope you enjoyed the meal. I turned from the table and walked away, each step feeling both heavy and incredibly light. The sound of my own heels clicking on the polished hardwood floor seemed to echo in the now quiet dining room. I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes on me, a collective gaze of shock and confusion. But for the first time in my life, their judgment felt powerless, like a storm raging on a distant shore. I had just detonated a bomb in the center of our family's carefully constructed reality. And now, I had to walk through the fallout. I had barely made it 10 steps toward the private dining room when I heard the frantic, uncharacteristically clumsy click of my mother's heels behind me. Dara, please, she said, her voice strained, catching up to me near the host stand. You can't just drop a revelation like this and walk away. We need to talk about this properly. I glanced over my shoulder at the rest of them. They had risen from the table and were now huddled in an awkward cluster near the bar. A portrait of social disorientation. My father looked distinctly uncomfortable, his hands shoved in his pockets, unused to being in a situation he couldn't control with his checkbook or his influence. Bradley looked pale, utterly deflated. Heather's expression was a chaotic storm of resentment, embarrassment, and something that, to my surprise, looked almost like awe. "I have a meeting, Mother," I said, my voice polite but firm. I gestured toward the frosted glass doors of the private room, where I could see the silhouettes of James Warren and my other investors. "Postpone it," she insisted, her hand gripping my arm. "This is family. This is more important." The irony of that statement was so thick I could taste it. My business commitments don't suddenly become optional just because you've finally decided. "My career is worthy of your attention," I replied, my voice cool. "Family hasn't been your priority for the past 5 years when it came to me. My work was." My father strode over, slipping back into his role as the family patriarch, the problem solver. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation tomorrow," he suggested, his tone calibrated to sound reasonable and in charge. "Come for dinner at the house. We have a great deal to discuss." "Yes," Bradley added, seemingly recovering some of his swagger as he saw a potential opportunity. "A great deal. In fact, Dara, my firm specializes in hospitality sector investments. We should talk about how we might help you expand your brand. I have contacts." I couldn't help the sharp, humorless laugh that escaped my lips. The sheer transparency of his pivot from condescension to opportunistic networking was breathtaking. "I don't need your help, Bradley," I interrupted, my voice cutting through his pitch. "And I'm doing quite well with my current advisors. But thank you for the offer. I didn't build this place to finally win your approval," I continued, turning my gaze back to my parents. "I didn't endure 18-hour days and live on nothing just so I could one day impress you at a family dinner. I built this because this is what I love. This is who I am. The fact that it's successful doesn't suddenly make my passion more valid than it was 5 years ago, when you called it servant's work." My mother flinched as if I'd struck her. "No one is saying that, darling," she backpedaled, her voice soft and placating. "We're simply proud. We're proud of what you've accomplished. Are you proud, Mother?" I asked, my voice dropping to a quiet intensity. "Or are you relieved? Are you relieved that my choices no longer embarrass you at the country club? Are you relieved that you can now tell your friends that your daughter, the creative one, owns one of the top restaurants in New York instead of having to vaguely mumble that I work with food?" Her sharp intake of breath told me I'd hit the nerve precisely. "That's unfair, Dara," my father interjected, his voice stern. "We have always wanted what's best for you." "No," I corrected him, my voice unwavering. "You wanted what was best for the Mitchell family name. You wanted what aligned with your rigid vision of success. There's a profound difference." Miranda appeared at my side again, a silent, supportive presence in her crisp whites. Her timing was impeccable. "Chef," she said quietly, "the Hayward Group is asking if you'll be joining them soon." She was giving me an out, a professional excuse to end this draining confrontation. 5 minutes, I promised her. She nodded and stepped discreetly away. I turned back to my family, who now looked like a group of chastened children. "I have to go," I said again, just as I was about to turn. Heather stepped forward. Her makeup was slightly smudged, and for the first time all night, the armor of her perfect composure seemed to have cracked. "Dara," she said, her voice lacking its usual sharp, competitive edge. I owe you an apology." She struggled with the words. "The things I said tonight, they were unkind. They were honest," I replied. "Not unkindly. They were what you truly thought. And that's the one gift this evening has given me. I finally got to see exactly how you all view me when you strip away the politeness." "That's not fair," Ethan spoke up, finally joining the conversation. He looked genuinely distressed. "People make judgments based on the information they have. We didn't know. You didn't know I was successful," I clarified, making the distinction sharp and clear. "But you knew I was pursuing something I loved. You knew I was working hard. For my family, That should have been enough to grant me some basic respect. It shouldn't require a 4-star review. A heavy, uncomfortable silence fell over the small group. No one had a response to that. It was the undeniable, ugly truth. To my utter astonishment, it was my father who broke the silence. He looked at me, his gaze direct, and for the first time, I saw something other than disappointment or conditional pride. I saw a flicker of genuine regret. "You're right," he said, the admission clearly costing him a great deal. "You're right. We should have supported your passion, regardless of its financial outcome." Coming from Richard Mitchell, a man who hadn't admitted a mistake in my entire lifetime. The words were a seismic event. "Where do we go from here?" my mother asked, her voice small, a genuine, uncertain question. It was another rarity. Margaret Mitchell always knew the proper social protocol for every situation. Now, she was lost. I took a deep breath, considering her question. Despite all the hurt, despite the years of feeling like an outsider, these were still the only family I had. A clean break had given me the space to build my own life. But a part of me, a small, stubborn part, still yearned for connection. Not the conditional connection of the past, but something real. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "But tonight has made one thing clear. If we're going to have any kind of relationship moving forward, it needs to be on entirely new terms. I'm not the family failure seeking redemption. I'm not the rebellious child who needs to be managed. I am a successful chef and a business owner, and I will be treated with the same respect you'd give any of your colleagues." Of course, my father agreed quickly, almost eagerly. "And that means no more comments about my career choices," I continued, setting the new ground rules. "No more unsolicited advice. No more attempts to set me up with stable men. And absolutely no attempts to network through my restaurant." I shot a pointed look at Bradley, who had the grace to look thoroughly embarrassed. "About my wedding," Heather began tentatively. "What about it?" I asked, my tone neutral. "I'd still like you to be there," she said, her voice softening. "As my sister, not as whatever we all thought you were before tonight." I looked at my sister, really looked at her, past the years of rivalry and judgment, beneath the Gucci and the ambition. There was still the girl who had shared a bedroom with me, who had taught me how to braid my hair, who had held my hand at our grandmother's funeral. "I'll be there," I promised. And then, a spontaneous offer, a gesture of goodwill on my new terms. "And if you'd like, I could host a dinner for the wedding party here at Mason, as my engagement gift to you." Heather's eyes widened. "You would do that?" she whispered. After how we've been, you're still my sister," I said simply. "But let's be clear. This isn't me trying to buy your approval. This is me offering something I'm proud of, on my own terms, because I choose to." "I understand," she said quietly. A small, genuine smile, the first one I'd seen from her all night, touched her lips. I would be honored. A fragile truce had been called. A tiny seed of a new beginning had been planted. "Now, I really do need to go," I said, gesturing toward the private dining room. "Of course," my father nodded, stepping back. "Your business comes first." "Not always," I corrected him gently. "But tonight, it does." As they gathered their things to leave, I added one more thing. "I'm free for brunch on Sunday, but not at your club. There's a small place in the East Village I think you should all experience. It's loud, it's crowded, and the food is incredible. We'll be there," my mother promised, looking relieved, grateful for this small, concrete step forward. I watched them file out of the restaurant, a silent, subdued procession. Their entire world had been turned upside down, their perspectives irrevocably altered. As the heavy glass door closed behind them, I let out a long, slow breath I didn't realize I had been holding for 5 years. I felt oddly, wonderfully light. I walked into the private dining room, the tense energy of the family confrontation dissolving as I crossed the threshold into my own world. James Warren and the other investors stood up as I entered. "Sorry to keep you waiting," I said, my voice calm and professional, betraying none of the emotional storm I had just weathered. Family matter. James, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a notoriously sharp business mind, gave me a knowing smile. Everything all right, Dara? It is now, I replied, and the truth of that statement settled deep in my bones. Now, let's talk about the new location. For the next hour, I was completely immersed. We discussed lease negotiations for a second. More casual bistro concept I was developing. We went over architectural plans and analyzed financial projections. In this room, I wasn't the disappointing daughter. I was the chef owner, a respected and capable leader. My opinion was the one that mattered most. The contrast was exhilarating. By the time the meeting ended and my investors departed, the main dining room was empty. The lights had been dimmed, and the cleanup crew was moving with quiet efficiency. I walked through the silent space, my hand trailing along the back of the empty banquettes. This place, Maison, was more than a restaurant. It was a testament to my resilience, a physical manifestation of a dream they said was impossible. I pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The relentless chaos of dinner service had given way to the orderly calm of closing. Stainless steel surfaces gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Miranda was at her desk in the corner, finalizing orders for the next day. She looked up as I entered. "So," she said, leaning back in her chair. That looked intense. "Family is complicated." I sighed, pulling up a stool. "Tell me about it." She laughed, a rich, warm sound. "My mother still introduces me as my daughter who works at a restaurant, like I'm a teenage waitress at Denny's, and I've been doing this for 20 years. I smiled, grateful for her easy understanding, for this camaraderie that existed only in the trenches of a professional kitchen. "Well, tonight, I think they finally understood. It's about time," she said simply. "Now, before I forget, I want your opinion on the rhubarb component for the new duck dish. I think a compote might be too traditional. I was thinking a foam, or maybe a fermented fluid gel." We spent the next 30 minutes talking about food, our conversation a rapid-fire exchange of ideas, flavors, and techniques. It was my native language, the place where I was most fluent, most confident, most myself. As we talked, I realized that the most important revelation of the evening wasn't about showing my family what I'd built. It was about fully, completely recognizing it for myself. I had created all of this not in spite of them, but entirely without them. My success was not a reaction to their disapproval. It was an independent creation, and that knowledge was a deeper, more satisfying validation than any apology they could ever offer. 2 weeks passed like a whirlwind. Sunday brunch at Elma's, the hole-in-the-wall spot in the East Village, had been a strange and revealing experience. My parents had been visibly uncomfortable with the mismatched chairs and the graffiti-decorated walls, but the food unpretentious, soulful, and masterfully executed had silenced their complaints. I never knew simple eggs could taste like this, my father had admitted, mopping up the last of his shakshuka with a piece of homemade sourdough. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was an opening, a small crack in the fortress of his culinary prejudice. The dynamic with my family was slowly, cautiously, being rewritten. My mother called 3 times, and instead of asking if I was ready to come home, she asked about the challenges of sourcing quality ingredients and what it was like to manage a large staff. Heather sent me frantic texts about her wedding planning, but now they were tinged with a new respect, asking for my opinion on the caterer's menu. Ethan even reached out to ask if he could bring his 2 young children by the restaurant on a quiet afternoon to see the kitchen. "I want them to know that success doesn't have to look just one way," he'd said. These were fragile beginnings, not the dramatic, tearful reconciliation of a movie. Real healing, I was learning, happens in quiet moments and small gestures. The most significant change, however, was internal. The desperate, youthful craving for their approval had finally vanished, replaced by a quiet, solid sense of self-worth. This newfound freedom rippled through other areas of my life. I officially launched a mentorship program for young chefs from disadvantaged backgrounds, using Messon's kitchen as a classroom every Saturday morning. Watching a young woman named Zoe, who reminded me so much of my younger self, perfectly execute a complex sauce for the first time brought me a satisfaction purer than any glowing review. One late Tuesday night, after the last staff member had gone home, I sat alone at my favorite table, Table 7, a notebook open to a blank page. For weeks, I had been struggling to write the introduction to my cookbook. The words had felt forced, inadequate. But now, in the quiet of my empty restaurant, my home, I finally knew what to say. I picked up my pen. Food has always been my truest language. I wrote. When words failed, I spoke through flavors. When paths seemed unclear, I followed my palate. The dishes in this book are more than just recipes. They are chapters of a life lived in pursuit of authenticity, not approval. 5 years ago, I stood at a crossroads between expectation and passion. Choosing the latter cost me nearly everything I had. But in return, it led me to the richest feast I could have ever imagined. That feast was not merely the success of a restaurant, but the profound discovery that true nourishment comes from honoring the fire within your own soul. I set down my pen, a feeling of deep, profound peace settling over me. The journey had been brutal. The scars on my hands from burns and cuts were a permanent roadmap of my apprenticeship. The memories of lonely, exhausting nights were still vivid, but I wouldn't have traded any of it. In choosing to build my own house instead of living in the one they had designed for me, I had found something more valuable than their acceptance. I had found myself. The door to the restaurant opened softly, and Marcus stuck his head in. Sorry, chef, I forgot my keys. He saw me at the table. Everything okay? I looked up from my notebook and smiled. A genuine, unburdened smile. Everything's perfect, Marcus, I said. Welcome home. He smiled back, understanding completely. As he retrieved his keys and let himself out, I looked around the beautiful, silent room one last time before closing my notebook. The reservation with my past had finally been honored. The table was cleared, and a new service was about to begin.